Today we are going to discuss percent of change, specifically percent of income. Before we begin the heart of the lesson, let's discuss what the word original means. It has different meanings depending on the context. What root word do you see in the word original? If you said origin or thought to yourself origin, you are exactly correct. Now, what do you think this Latin derivative means? If the words beginning, start, or first come to your mind, you are absolutely correct. So with this little bit of time, we are now going to look at 4 scenarios, and what I want you to do is pay close attention to what number they begin or start with. Then, whatever number is left over, I want you to determine if that final number is higher or lower than the starting number. Once you have made that determination, then you can decide if each of the scenarios represent increases or decreases. Once you've had a moment to think about your answer, I will click one more time and you will see the correct answer appear in yellow. In our first scenario, it says, last week I scored 8 points on the Friday quiz. This week I scored 10 points. So what we need to first do is think about where we started. What occurred first? Was it last week or this week? Since last week occurred first, the number associated with that is the number 8. So that is where we are starting. The other number left in this statement is 10. Is 10 higher or lower than 8? You should have thought to yourself that 10 is higher. Since it is higher, this scenario represents an increase. In scenario 2, it says the high temperature today will be 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature tonight will be 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So once again, let's think for a moment where we started. What occurred first? Yes, today comes first, and the number associated with that is 50. So we are beginning at 50. Now, if we look at where our final number ends, it ends at 35. Is 35 higher or lower than 50? You should have thought to yourself that it is lower. Therefore, this scenario represents a decrease. In scenario 3, it says a shirt at Aeropostale cost $12 this week. Last week, it was $20. So let's think about what occurred first. Was it this week or last week? Yes, last week occurs first, and the number associated with it is $20. So we are beginning with 20 and ending at 12. Since 12 is lower than 20, this scenario would represent a decrease. In our last scenario, which is scenario 4, it says tonight was the second time the Pacers played the Heat this season, and they scored 92 points. In the first game, they scored 80 points. Well, that last sentence gives us a hint that since it says it's the first game, 80 is going to be our starting number. And if you look at where your final number ends, it ends up at 92. Since 92 is higher than 80, this would represent an increase. So now that we've gone through those 4 scenarios and have talked about where our number starts, what do you think the antonym of original is? You should have heard me say this word repeatedly in each of the scenarios. Yes, the antonym is end. Whenever we decided whether our final number was higher or lower, we looked at where that number ended up. So what we're going to do now is go back through our scenarios and place an O above the original or starting number, and then an N above the new or ending number. So if you recall our first scenario, we decided that last week occurred first. Since the number 8 is associated with last week, we would place an O above the 8 because that's our original or starting number. And then our final or new ending number is 10, and this represents an increase because 10 is higher than 8. In scenario 2, we decided that today occurred first, so 50 would be our original number, and we ended at 35. That is our new number. Since 35 is lower than 50, it is a decrease. In scenario 3, we decided that last week occurred first, so 20 would be our original, and then this week is what happened last, and our ending number is 12. That is our new number, and since it is lower than 20, it represents a decrease. For our final scenario, we decided that the first game was our original, and that number associated with the first game is 80. And then we ended at 92. Since 92 is higher than 80, it is an increase. So you can see just by reading these scenarios, we can determine if it represents an increase or decrease before we begin any type of calculation. Now what we're going to actually do is figure out the percent of increase or decrease using a method called new change original. You will hear me refer to it as NCO, but once again, don't forget that the N stands for new, the C stands for change, and before we begin doing any calculations, let's think about how we're going to use this template that will be provided for you. You will see this NCO template in each of your scenarios as we go through it. Now, you notice that that 100 popped up right away. We know from prior lessons that percents are ratios that are compared to 100. So, we know without even reading the problem that 100 is going to be in our denominator. The way we decide where it goes, if you look at the way this NCO chart is set up, the left side represents anything that deals with numbers, and the right side deals with anything that is associated with percent. So since percents are out of 100, this 100 is going to go for the original on the percent side. Now, in all of these problems, we are trying to find the percent of change. Remember, our C stands for the letter change. Since our percent of change is what we're finding, that is where our variable is going to go because it is unknown. Remember, you can use any letter you want to represent the variable. I like to use the letter P because it helps remind me that I'm finding a percent, and I won't forget to attach that percent symbol on the end in my answer. Next, when we went through those scenarios, we said that the beginning number represented our original. So whatever number that is, that's going to go on the number side of our NCO chart. Then where we ended up, or our final number, was the ending number, and that is represented by our new. That's where we ended up. Now, we need to find how much this change is between the beginning and the ending number. So the way we find the change in math, that is represented by subtraction. We are always going to subtract the big number minus the small number. It doesn't matter if the bigger number is with the original or if it's with the new. You're always going to do big minus small. Now, if you look at this chart very closely, you see that on the N or new row, we don't have anything over here. On the C and the O rows, we have something on each side. Since we don't have anything on the N row, we can ignore that row and cross it out. So what we have left over will be our resulting proportion that we'll use to find the percent of change. So in essence, this proportion is the difference over the original, which was our beginning number, equals what we're trying to find, the percent over 100. So now what we're going to do is go back through those 4 scenarios and actually find the percent change. In scenario, we have that last week I scored 8 points on the Friday quiz, and this week I scored 10 points. If you recall, we know that percents are based out of 100, so we can automatically write that down. We're trying to find the percent of change, so that's where our variable is going to go. Our original number was the 8, so our 8 is going to go on the left of the O. O because this is our number side. Our new number, or where we ended up, was the 10. So the 10 is going to go to the left of the N on the number side. Then to find the change, we find the difference between 10 and 8, which is 2. We're going to cross out that top number because we do not need it since there's nothing on the other side. What we have left over is our resulting proportion. So our proportion we're going to use is 2 over 8 equals P over 100. We use cross products to solve proportions. So 8 times P equals 2 times 100. 8 times P is 8P, and 2 times 100 is 100. When we divide both sides by 8, we will get that we have a 25% increase. In scenario 2, once again, we can start with that 100, and we know that we're trying to find the percent of change, so that's our variable. We can do that without even reading the problem for these types of scenarios. Next, our original number was 50, so we're going to put a 50 on the left side of the O. Our new number was 35, so we're going to put a 35 on the left side of the N because that's where we ended up. And then we find the difference between 50 and 35, which is 15. We're going to cross out that top row because we don't have something on this side. So what results, or what is left over, is our proportion. 15 over 50 equals P over 100. We solve using cross products. 50 times P equals 50P. 15 times 100 equals 1,500. So 50 times P is 50P, and 15 times 100 is 1,500. We use inverse operations and divide both sides by 50 since that's the number next to P, and our answer will be a 30% decrease. As you can see from the first two scenarios, no matter whether it was an increase or decrease, the process is the same. You're always going to cross out that top row in your NCO chart, and what's left over on the bottom will give you your resulting proportions. Now, for the last two scenarios, we're going to move through a little quicker. However, remember, you can always review this PowerPoint as often as you like. In scenario 3, we're going to start with that P over 100 because we know that's what percents represent. Our original was 20 and our new was a 12. The difference between 20 and 12 is 8. We're going to cross out that top row because there's nothing on the right side of the N on the percent side. Our resulting proportion is 8 over 20 equals P over 100. We use cross products to solve. So 20 times P is 20P, and 8 times 100 is 800. We use inverse operations to solve this one-step multiplication equation by dividing both sides by 20, and our answer is going to be a 40% decrease. In the final scenario, we're starting with that P over 100. Our original was 80, and then the new was 92. Remember, we already had these labels. The difference between these two numbers is 12, and we're going to cross out that top row because there's nothing on the right side of N, so we can ignore it. Our resulting proportion is 12 over 80 equals P over 100. We use cross products to solve. 80 times P is 80P, and 12 times 100 is 1,200. We're going to use inverse operations and divide both sides by 80 since that's the number next to the variable, and our answer is a 15% increase. So how I would like to conclude this lesson is just to summarize or review how we use that. Remember, we start with that P over 100. The beginning number is going to go on the left side of the O. The ending number is going to go on the left side of the N. Then our change is the difference between the beginning and ending number. Keeping in mind, you always do big number minus small. Cross out that top row because there's nothing on the right side. And our resulting proportion is the difference over the original equals P over 100. And that concludes our lesson on percent change.